Today's lesson will be glazing. So I have several pieces on the table here, and they are ready to glaze, but they haven't been prepared in any way other than having been bisque fired. So this is porcelain. It looks white. It was white when it was thrown. It's white when it's fired, and it'll be white when it's final fired. But I want to call your attention first of all to how this is trimmed. You see the little ridge right here, and that is the glaze catcher. So this is sitting properly right side up. If the glaze happens to run down the side of the pot, it will catch ever so slightly on this little ridge, and that is a trimming feature that I usually put into the pots. So, but before they can be glazed, the first principle of glazing pots is that you don't glaze the bottoms typically for this type of pottery. So what we're going to do is we're going to wax the bottoms in order to keep the glaze from sticking. So let me see if I can demonstrate how this is going to go. So what we have here is just a normal electric skillet. And in the electric skillet, we have wax. Now, it's very difficult to really see, but there is a pool of wax in there. I think you can see the reflection. So what we are going to do is, I've hopefully from the last time, and I can actually tip this up, yeah, I can see that the wax is flowing back and forth, and it looks like it's going to be pretty close to right. Now, I do have more wax. I can just put this more wax in there as needed. But I think that for demonstration purposes, I'm going to just continue here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, in this case, my mug, and I'm just going to set it on the bottom, give it a 180-degree turn, and then lift it straight up. Now, the reason for the 180-degree turn, let me just back up here, and you can see that the skillet is just sitting on a table. I have no guarantee that that table is perfectly level. It's actually pretty good in my studio here, but just because you never know, if you give your pot a 180-degree turn, then you should have a nice wax line that is pretty even all the way around. And I think you can see that's pretty close. Okay, so that's what we're trying to achieve with the waxing. So I'm going to continue and wax the rest of these pots now. So I have waxed all of these pots now, and you can see that most of them have a nice even coating. But what's going on this platter? Well, the foot is just a little bit deeper than the wax pool, so this remained dry right here. Now I have several options for what to do there. Keep in mind, the principle here is you're trying to keep the clay, or I'm sorry, you're trying to keep the glaze from sticking to the bottom of your pots so that you don't get glaze all over the shelves when you fire. So what I can do is I can simply wipe off any glaze that accumulates right there, or I could take some wax resist and continue to wax that. So I want to introduce wax resist in any case, so I think I will do that now. Wax resist is a water-based emulsion of wax in water, and it has some surfactants in there to make it so that the wax will emulsify in water. Now, you want to resist the temptation to shake this, because if you shake it, it'll get all bubbly. If it's a little bit stuck in the container, you can shake it just a little bit, but try not to shake it too much because you'll just make it bubbly. So the next thing I need to do is get myself a brush. So we will simply dip in, and then we can go over to our pot and paint the wax on the area that remained dry from before. that really well now. Now that needs to dry. So this stuff, since it's water-based, you actually have to wait for the water to dry for the wax to cure in place. Whereas the other stuff, you just wait for it to cool down and it kind of freezes up and is hard. So this is still soft. We want to give that maybe 5 or 10 minutes. So I'll take a little pause here while I get the glazes out. So I'd like to glaze this closed form lidded box. And in order to do that, I need to do a lot of waxing, because there's a lot of places where you get clay in contact with, or the piece comes around, you know, it's got a lid on it, so it touches itself. So what we have to do is wax every place where you don't want it to get fused together by glaze, or every place that it touches. So if you just look at this thing, you can see that it's got a gallery, kind of a reverse gallery and a flange here, and then inside that fits down over that lip. So if you just hold this on the outside, you can see that's how far we're going to need to, let me get this around this way. That's how far we need to go up inside the lid and have it be bare clay. Okay, in addition to that, all of this contact surface has to be bare clay. So the way I'm going to start waxing this is, first I'm just going to take the lid part and set it over here. Then I'm going to take the pot itself and get it more or less centered. So I just set it on there. It's not too bad. I can give that a little tap and sometimes it'll get better. That looks really good. So we're going to commence with the waxing now. I have not waxed the bottom of this piece yet. The bottom itself is pretty simple, and that can be waxed in the paraffin, the hot paraffin pan. But for this, I'm using wax resist. And again, don't be tempted to shake this up, because you'll be sorry. It'll be really bubbly, and when it's bubbly, it's no fun. So I'm going to start by just trying to get an even coating of wax on the very top. Now it's kind of difficult to see where you put this. In other cases, it's more of a contrast. When you put the wet wax on, it will darken the clay. But in this case, it's not really darkening it much. So you just have to put a lot on. Make sure that you get it well covered. So I'm doing the flange part now. I'm going to come down and do the gallery part. Now, the glaze that comes up the side of this, you don't want that touching either, so you don't need to really wax around the corner particularly, but I would make sure that the wax is nice and thick right at the top of this corner, so that it'll kind of keep the glaze away from that area. Now, this part is completely done. The next part, I have actually probably done this in the wrong order, because what I want to do is I want to set this on top of that. And so now I'm going to have to wait until this dries. Unless I do something else, which is probably a very good idea. So let me get another device that's called a chuck. It's good to see all of this anyway. So this is called a chuck, and I can set this piece on top of that, and it's going to be great. So now I'm going to set this part aside, and this part as well. Take this bat off and return my Giffen grip. Giffen grip does a really nice job of centering up and gripping something like this. So what we're going to do now is we're going to set this on here, but we can't just, if I can set it on there, and is that good? Well, let's spin it and see. Oh no, that's not good at all. So what I'm going to do is level this. And I think I'm going to take a minute to adjust that picture because this is a little too high. So, other way, there we go. That should be better, it's a little more centered now. So I'm going to use my level on this. And we'll start off in one axis, and so I see that it needs to go up a little bit. So I'm just going to tip that up and get the bubble nice and leveled. Now I'm going to turn this 90 degrees and I'm going to check it again. And in this case, I need to go, I'm tipping it back toward me, and now the bubble is perfect. I wish you could see the bubble, but I think most people know how to read a level. So now that's level in this axis. I want to go back and check it in the first axis because I did move it a little bit. And yeah, it needs to be micro adjusted now. And that's good. And that's good. This is the same procedure that I did for the trimming. Okay, so now when I spin this, it should look pretty well behaved, and it's got a little bit of a wobble to it, but that's okay. What we want to do is wax certainly this part, because that is the part that's going to rest on the gallery. And again, I don't need to go really far up the sides, but make sure you just kind of really hit the corner good, so that you're not going to have glaze, that's going to be touching, very closely, intimately touching the bottom of the piece. So, they're going to stick together if there's any glaze. So now I'm going to wax about ½ an inch up. This is pretty extreme. When you look at the insides of these things, the wax, or it's going to be bare clay when it's all done, will go up quite high because you have to in order to fit around that lower flange. Okay, it sometimes takes 3 or 4 applications to get this wax on thick enough and evenly, so just be patient. Okay, I think that's good. So that is all of the waxing that I need to do prior to glazing. So let me just hold these pieces together and have a look. So these are going to fit together like this, and I need to make sure that this flange doesn't come up higher than where I've waxed in here. And I would say that my waxing is a little bit deeper than the height of that flange, so that's good. And the wax comes right out to the corner, so when I put these two things together, if there's any running from the top down to this seam, it's game over. So you should pay some attention to putting glazes on that are going to be well behaved and will stay where you put them. Otherwise, if you can't do that, you should wax more here in order to make sure that there's no chance that the glaze from up here drips down onto the seam or onto the pot below. Now I have to put this one in the paraffin pan, and I'm going to do that off screen because that's been demonstrated already. So that is how you wax the closed form lidded box in preparation for dip glazing. So the glazes are normally stored in 5-gallon buckets, or in some cases smaller buckets. Here at my glazing station I have 2 glazes out now. I have all of the pots that I've pre-waxed, and I also have a container with just water. It's pretty dirty, but this is my what I rinse off my tools in. So if I get glaze all over the tools, I just rinse them in there, and that gets pretty disgusting. So when the glaze sits for a long time, it'll get a sheen of water. In fact, you can see that's like 3 inches deep, that water that's on the surface. So I'm going to stir this. I'm just using a regular paint stick. This particular glaze is called Tan Matte, and it's a really nice color, so we're going to use that. Let's continue to stir. So I'll just show a little bit of how this goes. Now, I'm not going to do this all the way, but you may have to stir for 3 to 5 minutes in some cases to make sure that all of the material is kicked up off the bottom of the bucket. It does settle out. Some much worse than others, but generally if you still get globs on your stick like this, it's not done. So we're going to come back to that one. This particular bucket is a lot more full, so I'm using a much taller stick, but it's the same thing. You just get down to the bottom. You can see how that was settled out. This one is really mixing quick and easier than the other one. So there are differences between the glazes. It depends on what the materials are that are in there and how fast they settle out. Interestingly, this one has a lot of iron oxide in it, and that doesn't seem to settle out. It must be really small particles. So not quite done yet. I have to stir quite a bit more. So I'm not going to do all of that on the video. I'm going to take a little pause here. So fast forward, everything is well mixed, and I'd like to note that I put the bucket lids on the table just behind the bucket, and then the bucket lid upside down makes a good place to rest the dirty stir sticks. So that's how that goes. And then this device, which we're going to use next, is called a glazing tongs or a dipping tongs. And you can see that you can open it up and grip things. So I'm going to have to demonstrate this, but I think I need to put the camera on a tripod first. So this is a pot that I want to dip, and I want to use the dipping tongs. Now with pots like this that have a clear top and a bottom, and you can hold it up and hold the opening toward you, that's what you want to do. And then you want to take the dipping tongs, get that down a little bit, you want to take the dipping tongs and put it on the top of the pot like this. That way, without doing any kind of gymnastics, you can dip the pot down into the glaze, empty it out, and pull it out without having to contort your hand or your body anywhere. Now, even though I did mix these glazes well, when they sit for more than, let's say, a minute, you need to give them another little mix right before you use them. So, mix them both up. And I think I'm going to use the dark glaze first. This one is called Tenmoku Plum, and it makes a good base coat with the lighter glaze over the top of it. I have an example of what that is going to look like. So this is another pot where I have the Tenmoku Plum on the bottom, and then this is Tan Matte on top of it. So these are the 2 glazes that I'm using, and we can only hope to get something that looks kind of like that. Move that over just a little bit, or move this down a little bit maybe. Well, I think most of the action needs to be up here. Okay, so I'm going to take my dipping tongs and get it on there. Now I just stirred this, So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plunge down in and out, and you're going to see I don't hold it under for 3 seconds or any of that nonsense. It's just in, fill it up, and out, and that's it. Now this pot has wax on the bottom, so you can see that very little glaze stuck there, and I can simply take the tongs and release it like that right onto the table. Now the chalky appearance is because this is already dried. The clay is very porous, and so the glaze consists of clay and coloring and other particles in an aqueous suspension. So when you dip spongy bisque-fired clay down into it, it acts exactly like a sponge, sucks up a lot of that water, and deposits the solids onto the pot. So that's what we have here. And I'm just going to I'm going to dedicate this tongs to this bucket, so I don't have to rinse it just yet. Now, for the second coat, this is all dried. I can see that I have a little touch-up to do on the bottom, and that's fine. But what I'm going to do, since it's been a minute and a half, I'm going to go ahead and give this a little stir. Okay, now I'm going to dip this in, and I'd like to, I'm going to go down this way, and I'm going to put it at kind of an angle. So let's just go ahead, do that. I hear a little glug, so that means that some of the glaze has actually gone inside. But now I'll pull it out, and you can see that I have a kind of a two-tone. I'll set that down here. Need to be careful at this point not to touch the wet glaze. Since this is the second time I've dipped, some of that sponginess, it's soaked up a lot of water. So the second coat quite often will take a long time to dry. So I will quite often have a fan running during glazing, but for the video purposes, I'm not going to do that because it would really drown out my voice. Just looking down at this, I can see that that's quite wet, and it's going to stay wet for a while. So I'm just going to leave it sit right there. And I think I'm going to go ahead and just glaze a couple more pieces, and maybe I'll talk a little bit while I'm doing that. So I think I'm going to do most of these pieces in that glaze theme. It's nice to make pieces that match, or even if they're not an identical piece, that they kind of have the same colors on them, the same decoration, so it makes them look like a set. So I'm going to go ahead and glaze this mug. You can see that it's all waxed on the bottom. I'm going to do the same thing, put the tongs on the top and dip it right in there and out. Okay, good. So I'm just going to set that there. We probably run out of space here. Do the pitcher same way. When you do this way, it actually can go pretty fast because I'm just going to put my base coat on several pots first. Base coat. Do the same thing with this bowl. And we're going to do exactly the same thing with this plate. Almost seems too simple. There's a lot of glaze on the bottom here that we'll have to touch up with the sponge, and I'll demonstrate that a little bit later. Now, sometimes glazes will actually prefer to have two coats. And to understand whether or not that's a good idea, it really comes with experience. Most of the time when I do this dipping like I did, where I've got one solid coat and then a second coat on top, most of the time that would not have 2 coats of the base glaze because that would just be too heavy. In some rare instances, you may need to put 2 base coats on and then another, what would you call that, the top coat. It's not really exactly a top coat, it's kind of the accent color that's on the top of the pot. So let's call it that, it's the accent color. You don't always have to put an accent color on either. Sometimes you could do sgraffito on the glaze surface that you put on there, scrape it away and show some of the clay. Or you could decorate with some other oxides or coloring materials. So I've got all of these done. I haven't done the bottle yet. No reason I can think of not to do the bottle this exact same way. Now when I do bottles like this, I don't go out of my way to try to glaze inside. Some glaze will get down in there just from the process. But let's just go ahead and see how this goes. So with this, you kind of have to experiment around how to hold it. That looks fine. So you want to get it down in there. It's going to have a little bit of glaze go down into the pot, and that's fine. It may be partially glazed or fully glazed on the inside, but just exactly the same thing. Set that on the table. Now I'm going to go ahead and rinse off this tolerance because I'm not sure what we're going to do next other than put this accent color on these pots. Now this has sat long enough, so I'm going to stir it again, and I can feel, just guessing, there's probably a 1/4 inch thick or more of sludge on the bottom that needs to be stirred back in. This particular glaze is settling a lot faster than the other one. That's something I commented on, and that's very normal. You just have to learn which ones do which, and in all cases you should stir until all of the solids are incorporated. You don't want lumps on the bottom. Okay, this is going to go very fast as well. We'll start with the plate, and what I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to dip maybe 2/3 and leave it kind of a two-tone. Let's see how that looks. I'll hold that in for a sec. Now one of the things you'd really like to do with the accent color is get some thick spots, and it's very difficult to see on the video perhaps, but there are some thick spots on the side here, and those are going to have a nice appearance when the glaze sets. So with the bowl, I'm going to do pretty much the same thing. Just going to dip about 2/3. Maybe this is more than 2/3 in this case. But again, I want to try to get some drips to go into the bowl. Anytime you can get drips coming down the side of your piece, that can really look attractive. Okay, so with this bottle, I'm going to have to hold it upside down. This is a little bit tenuous. It's a little bit hard for me to do, but I can just kind of test it a little bit. I think I can dip this down and get that coated and get it out without dropping it. That's what you have to do, is pinch it tight enough not to drop it, and there we go. Set that down, you won't be able to see where it is sitting to dry. Do the mug the same way. I'm going to put a little bit of an angle on this because it's just interesting, it's visually interesting. Now I am, with this particular, with the top coat here, or the accent color, I am holding that down for 2 or 3 seconds, and I like what's happening here. I can see some nice drips coming off the lip where the glaze is kind of heavy, and that is going to look really good when the glaze fuses and runs a little bit. So finally we'll do the pitcher exactly the same way. It can be hard sometimes to hold them, but then that forces you to think about when you're making the pot, make sure you make it something that is going to be glazable. Later on, you know you have to hold it upside down. If you don't think you can do that, you have to devise some other way. So this is interesting. I just made a boo-boo. So the side of my hand right here where it's dirty, that touched this pot. And so you can see that it took off my top coat. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to glaze just the very edge of that again. So I fixed that error. It does look like a little shadow there, but that's exactly what it is now. I think it's mostly shadow. So hopefully that will end up covering and it'll look fine. Okay, so that is the basic introduction to glazing. There are many other ways you can approach glazing. There are glazes that you paint on. There are decorating materials that you can use. But for this segment, we're going to stop here. That's the basic introduction to how to do glazing with the dipping process. So one thing that's really, really important is when you have a glazed and then a pot that you've allowed the glaze to dry on, quite often you'll have glaze stuck to the wax. Is it stuck? Well, this is a damp sponge and pretty quick and easy that just comes off. Now I'm going to go around to the other side of the sponge where it's a little cleaner, and that's it. So wipe your bottoms so that you don't have extra glaze stuck to them. Here's an alternative decoration technique. So what I've got here is porcelain bowls, and these have turquoise glaze on just part, and then it's going to be very white, porcelain white, where there's no glaze. So I thought I would do something like this. So this is iron oxide that is literally splashed on with a brush. So here is iron oxide in water. It's just a mixture of red iron oxide. It's like rust in water, and if we load up the brush, we can just do it directly. So like that, and try to get it from the other side. It doesn't matter if it looks sloppy, that's kind of the point. So you just continue. All right. I think probably this can be overdone, so I'm just going to put a smaller amount on these. Try to keep it on the outside. And if a little goes inside, it's fine. So that's the planters of that style. And then I have a few bottles. I thought I would do the same thing too. Just load them up here. Do them all at once. Notice I've taken some precautions for not getting this all over the place. This is my glazing tub, so it expects to get a little bit of something on it, and then I'll have to wash it. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, that's enough for the iron oxide. So I've got to put that away, and then I'm going to get out the cobalt, and we'll do a few more with cobalt. Okay, so I cleaned up the work surface in between because I didn't want to get iron and cobalt cross-contaminating. So the cobalt is pretty much the same thing. It's cobalt oxide in water, and it's a pretty dilute solution. And it's going to go on looking gray or black, like so. All right, that's fine. Two more to do here. Oop. Guess my brush can only take so much of that. Just have to be gentle with it. And that'll be fine. Okay, so that's something interesting to do. I probably should show some after firing pictures here as well, so you really see, you know, you can't really tell exactly what it looks like when they're in this state. They're so much more wonderful when the glaze has been vitrified and turned into a nice glassy substance. So that's it for this, and thanks for watching.